Welcome to Things My Mother Forgot to Mention.
The podcast where we say everything our mothers didn't.
I'm Jan, a trauma therapist and author turned rogue storyteller, here to talk openly about the body, aging, and all the, wait, what? Moments of womanhood.
And I'm Patty, an online business and tech nerd whose purpose is to elevate the voices of women in our world and who doesn't believe in taboo topics. Things My Mother Forgot to Mention is the podcast for every woman who's ever said, wait, why didn't anyone mention this to me?
Join Jan and Patty, two outspoken, curious, outrageous women, as they dive headfirst into a messy, magical, and often WTF realities of aging, health, and quite simply being a woman.
From rogue chin hairs and vaginal thinning
to mental health, perimenopause, and scalp cancer. Yes, really.
Nothing is off limits. It's funny, it's raw, it's real talk your mother definitely skipped.
Let's get into it.
Hello, Jan.
Hey there, Patty. It's good to see you. Happy New Year.
It's good to see you. Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Excellent.
So we are following up and we have a new guest today, correct?
We do. We're doing our follow-up on grief. And today we are talking with your colleague and kind of
Yes.
mine now also, Rick Butts. And I will read a little bit about him. Rick has been a therapist for the past 37 years. During this time, he has been a professor at two different universities. At the University of Cincinnati, he taught in their Human Social Services Department. And at the Cincinnati Christian University, he taught in their Masters of Arts in Counseling program. Throughout these 37 years, he has maintained a private practice focused for several years on children, adolescents, and families. Then he transitioned to adults with an interest in developmental and relational trauma and couples counseling. In 2013, he co-founded the Healing Our Core Issues Institute with Jan Bergstrom, which is a training program for therapists, social workers, and marriage and family therapists, psychologists, and coaches. Welcome, Rick.
Welcome, Rick. Good to see you.
It's good to be with both of you today. I feel honored to be here. I believe I might be the first male.
Yes, you are. And thank you
are.
so much for doing that, because people think this is just for women, and it's not. So thank you.
Yeah, but we are selective with the men that we choose and men who are advocates and allies for women, of which you are.
Well, I'm glad to be here with both of you today.
Yeah.
So what's it like for you to hear that today you're going to talk about grief? Did you feel like you had enough experience, material for it? I mean, what kind of went through your mind, Rick?
Well, I have been thinking about it. You both invited me to come on to the podcast. And so over the last couple of weeks, particularly, I've been thinking about it. And yes, I think that I have more than enough material to add my perspective. Jan, you certainly know my story, and Patty's heard a bit of that as well. So, like I said, just been reflective on it, and it's actually brought up some new insights, which is part of the ongoing story of our lives, I believe, for all of us, and with various things. And so in my mindfulness practice, just trying to be attuned and reflective on this theme in my life.
Yeah. And so do you want to share a little bit about what that is, or where you want to start?
Yes, I have been thinking about this theme, and one of the things that I listened to your first podcast on death that the two of you did a few weeks ago, and it got me to thinking about how my experience, and this is information about me, was that when I was 7 years old, that would be my first entry into death that I really remember. And that my grandma, my maternal grandma, passed away. and that I came down with the chicken pox.
Hmm.
And I can very clearly remember wanting to go to the funeral, and I wasn't allowed to, and I was really upset about that.
Mm.
And so in the last couple of weeks thinking about this, it all of a sudden hit me. I thought that would have been my first story, and I think it was listening, Jan, to you talking about being in elementary school and your principal
Mhm.
dying, and that your parents didn't talk to you and took you to the service. And that was actually the catalyst, listening to that, where I thought, that's really interesting how Jan and our experiences were different, is that how I could very clearly remember that. And I don't think you, Patty, had any early
Mm-mm.
experiences like this. You were a little
No.
bit older as
Yeah.
you talked about it.
Yeah.
So then my entry into, which is something that is more dramatic, is when I was 10 years old. And that 9 days before my 10th birthday and 9 days before Christmas, my dad died.
Mm.
And so that's something I've in my own therapy have really worked on, and emerges in different ways. But Patty, when you said that question that you and Jan asked about what your mom didn't teach you, I all of a sudden had a memory. And Jan, I know you haven't heard this story either, is that the Wednesday night before my dad died, I was staying with my aunt. And my mom came home from the hospital. My dad was 37 years old. My mom was 32. I have one sister that's 2.5 years younger than me. That my dad was doing okay. I won't go into the details of his health issues. Didn't know he was dying at that point. But my mom had just gotten to my aunt's house, and the hospital called and said that my dad had started to decline, which now I think back was 2 days before he died. And so it was the beginning of the end. And in my aunt's house, my mom was on the phone. She started to cry, and I went into the bathroom. My mom was upset. And this is the beginning of a theme that has been with me about, which is a part of the grief stages from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is denial.
Mm.
Is that my nervous system was overwhelmed, and I withdrew, went into the bathroom, and my mom came to the door. And I can notice that as I tell you both this story. And I, she knelt down, and she was really upset
Mm.
and was crying, and I was there with her. So that is just something that's just in the last 24 hours hit me, that it's something I know. But in thinking about this, Jan, when you asked that question, I was like, oh, yep. I wanted to share that with y'all, because you think
So that's
about,
what you learned about grieving.
yeah,
This is how
what,
you grieve, or when something is lost, this is how you handle it. You withdraw and you shut down and no one talks about it. Is that what you're saying?
well, that's how I dealt with it.
Yeah.
She came to me really upset. And one of the things that we talk about in our work is, I think I absorbed her grief right then and there, because she
Oh,
was
interesting.
really upset, and it was the two of us. And so she was actually, and she didn't do anything wrong. Her husband is dying, and she was saying goodbye to me. I've got to go back to the hospital. Now, this links to then, Jan, now full circle, coming back to what you said, I think, and this was like an aha for me in the last 24 hours, is that on the morning of my dad's death, is that I can remember knowing something was happening. I didn't know that he had died at that moment, but I honestly remember laying in bed as a 10-year-old thinking, if I just lay here, denial,
Mm.
which again, the nervous system overwhelmed, and being able to face that. And that is something that I have really, when I think about grief and the origin story, what I did day, really, the last 24 hours is think back on, 2 days prior, which I had never linked those two
Hmm.
before, which is important for people as I've been thinking about your audience and people listening to this. And I think it's really important to do a grief timeline. I don't know if anybody has
Oh,
talked about
no, we
that
haven't talked
before.
about that.
Oh, yeah.
Tell
Yeah.
me about that.
Yeah, that's something. Well, I've been thinking about is that really beginning, and you all talked about this in the first podcast where you both shared, again, Jan, that was your first experience. Nobody talked about it, which was classic. At that time, nobody would talk about that. You went, you saw the body. It was traumatizing. Patty, you were, I think, in your teens, weren't you?
Hmm.
But I think being able to track that, because as you all have been talking in these last three podcasts, I think of, grief as multifaceted. And so the loss of a obviously this is dramatic, what I'm talking about. I've done a lot of work around this. I had some new insights today, which is why I'm saying this. You can revisit things, but starting with a baseline of, this is the first time I thought um, about death. This is the first loss that I had, and then track that, and then underneath of that timeline is what was that like for me? So that would be the developmental element of it. It's like that for me. I was, my first when I'm 7 years old is I wanted to be there. I think that's my extroverted relational part and the loss of my grandma, which is interesting. I mean, I did because I didn't go. That now what I'm talking about, overwhelming grief and shutdown, and then my experience just a couple of days later, and really beginning to develop what I believe is something I've had to, well, I don't believe, I know is a part of my story is denial, is I'm really good at that. So the nervous system is a self-protective response, shut down. Um, of course, as a 10-year-old boy, how that 10-year-old boy shows up still to this day. I'm so much better with all the work I've done, but is that I can go into denial. Oh, that is not really happening. That can be fine. And many people have that.
So what you're saying is that the pattern was struck back then. Your mother didn't teach you a lot, or they didn't talk a lot about what
Mhm.
is grieving, or you saw a different thing. And what you automatically did is shut down, and that shows up in your life today. Is that
Mhm.
what you're
Yes.
saying? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
When your grandmother passed and you wanted to go but you couldn't,
Hmm.
did you do you have any memories of what grief looked like as you were then presumably one of the only people, if not the only person home, while
Hmm.
others were going, right? And others got to go. So there was still had to have been grief even as a child in some way, whether or not you remember it, that was a different story. But do you
Hmm.
have a recollection of, or was that the first moment of starting to be like, well, if I can't be there, it's not happening kind of situation with
Hmm.
denial?
Hmm. That's good, Patty. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, it could have been because my other grandma stayed home with me that day. I remember that, but I don't think I have anything. I'd have to think about that more. It's a great
Yeah.
question, which I will. Thank you. Yeah, that's like because that I like how you link that back is that could have been the origin story. The real, it's like, well, okay, fine, not there, which is a part of our death denying culture.
Right.
That people don't want to face that, so that's like natural for us. And going back to what after this, and of course that whole week, and I don't, I could say more about that. But what's interesting is that then I don't think we talked about it. I went back to school. I was in fourth grade, and I don't remember any acknowledgement of that
From your
or
mom.
yeah, yeah, from my mom or anybody really.
Yeah.
And it's just like we continued on. And then I grew up. So then this is the loss. So it's like the death, loss in all the different ways that again your listeners I'm encouraging them to think about all the different kinds. The death of an animal can be a
Yeah.
huge thing. a friendship, a job, things like that. And
Don't you think, Rick, though, that like you're talking about different kinds of grief, but some people actually feel it and do grieving,
mm,
if you want to put it as a verb, grieving, I'm grieving.
mhm,
And that may be, I don't know what that would look like, is that someone is actually allowing themselves to feel
mhm,
it, to cry, it kind of can be
mhm.
up and down and all that. So what you're saying, though, is that someone died and there was loss, but no one really grieved. Does that feel true?
Right, at least that I remember. That's right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then again, that gets formed, and that's why I'm saying for each individual, and you both have thought about that and talked a bit about your grief timeline. But I think that's important for everybody is to think about that, like we're talking about that. It's like looking at then the pattern that emerges, for
Mhm.
you, because then you just put your head down and take care of business. That's one of my taglines that I say, you
Right.
know. And I was just gonna say, and you don't grieve,
Right.
Jan. Great,
And you
great.
don't grieve.
Yeah.
It's just you move on.
Mhm.
Yeah. So with that sort of early grief cycle for you of being rooted in denial, when you talk about other types of grief throughout your life, then
Mhm.
loss of relationships, loss of pet, loss of
Mhm.
job, did you have similar reactions and responses to grief and all the various types of grief in your life? Was it always sort of denial until you learned something else that you
Mhm.
kind of went towards?
Well, again, preparing myself for this time together with both of you is that actually when I don't know if anybody has talked about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief.
Yeah, I did a little bit.
Okay. Is that this is too is a part of the unfolding in all of our lives. So this is the good news, right? It's like, oh, there's something new to explore and to think about. I actually did, because this is a part of my timeline, is that then the next 4 years, my mom and sister and I moved to our small town, and those 4 years somewhat was thriving. Now, I had not done this original grief work again, but I'm going forward. But so if you think of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the stages of grief, the first one is denial, which
Denial.
I've done well. And then it is anger, which my personality is I'm not an angry guy,
You
but
don't
this is
feel
where the angry part of me popped up again. I don't think, Jan, you've even heard this, because this has been, I've been thinking about this. And, the bargaining, which ebbs and flows, and then the depression, which is what you were saying, and then the acceptance. And then I had a sixth one for sure about the meaning of it.
Mm.
But when I was 14 years old, my mom announced to me that she'd been dating was going to be my stepdad. But the night she told me that she was going to marry John, you cannot make this up. My stepdad's name is John Smith. So you just can't even make that up. So the night she told me, though, I had a fit. And I was, that wasn't my personality, but I was upset. And my sister and I just recently talked about this, because in our house, I,
Interesting.
I didn't know this, but she told my sister first in her room.
Mm.
And then my sister was kind of listening through the wall as she's telling me. And so my sister was younger. I don't know, how old was she at that point? She was about 11, and so she just accepted it. She had a lot of thoughts and feelings about it, but she didn't express them. But oh, I did. And I was really mad about it. And I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this, and I thought, well, that's interesting, Rick. That, I would say, was my first time to really be angry. My dad died, and now um, I've got to deal with this.
Right. The
And
family's changing now.
Yeah.
the system is changing, and I was okay with the system that we had established over these 4 years. Again, because I've shoved down the grief of my father. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Shoved that down, put my head down, went back to school, plugged along, and I'm life is good. Uh, this is a funny tagline. I used to say that those 4 years after my dad died, so talk about denial, is that when we moved to our home in our small town, is that was Camelot. That is rooted in the early 60s in our country when John Kennedy was president of the United States. That's what I'm referring to. It was Camelot to me. It was.
Yeah.
And so this was disrupting the pattern, and I was not happy about it at all. And so I was thinking about that with my timeline of experiencing anger, still detached from my grief over the loss of my dad. I really think that I feel some embarrassment because so many people have such a hard time with that, but that was my coping strategy.
Yeah.
But I think that later on in your life, you did do some grieving around your dad, and it was
Yes,
real grieving rather than,
right.
being angry and then just kind of getting on with life.
Hmm. Yes, and then later on in my life, yes, that was able to really sit with the loss, feel the grief, and it was incredible and transformative. It's one of those pre and post kind of experiences. And then the last thing I'll say, again, in my saga of grief that was really significant is then when I was 35 years old, my mom died of cancer. And that was a significant loss, even though 35 is not young. I consider myself young, married, had two kids, and four and 1.5, and a baby on the way. And my mom was diagnosed with an aggressive breast cancer and died in 6 months.
Wow.
And that I was also, Jim will appreciate this, working full time, working on a doctoral degree, and had a part-time private practice that you read about, Patty, and went through this. And so when my mom died, I then went into, which would be that stage 4. And I think that was a combination of my mom and my unprocessed emotions with my dad. Uh, I went into a depressive episode for a couple of years.
Hmm.
I continued to do all those things, and I don't know how I did it, but I did it because I put my head down and just took care of business, which is not healthy. So as people are listening to this, this is not how you want to grieve.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you a question, Rick. Do you
Yeah.
think that young kids really know how to grieve? I mean, like you're talking when you're 10 and
Mm,
then 14, or, I mean, your grandmother died, then your father died. And do you think kids know how to grieve, or is it something that your mother or father should have been talking to you about, or do you know what I just kind of want to get your feel
mhm, mhm. I definitely think kids feel it. And again, that's where every child is different. And I know that it was in there for me. I know it again because of talking to my sister and how she dealt with that. But yes, that's an unfortunate thing that our mothers didn't support us in our feelings of loss and talking to it. Now, I think it might be better today. And then, the research now that was not there at that time around attachment theory and what we know about that, because parents get depressed, they withdraw. That's how I think of my mom.
Yeah.
And then it's an experience of neglect for kids.
Hmm.
And so
And kids kind of, I know, get stuck in one of the stages, either angry all the time or
mhm,
really depressed or hyperactive all the time. If something happens, if you're looking at the stages, don't you think they kind of get stuck or arrested somewhere?
mhm, yes. And then like I was arrested in the denial element of it. So my 10-year-old self, it's like, and then I shared that with you. So yes, I absolutely think so. And after my mother died was when I and went through that and that grief. And then as I began to come out of that was when then I was introduced to the work of PMLany. And that brought me into the next part of my life, which I was able to go back through an experiential process and really grieve my father's funeral. And it's an interesting kind of experiential process because of the mind's eye work with reparenting of historical selves, I was able to drop into that scene of when my dad died, and the therapist was brilliant who guided me through that. And she created a Gestalt type of experience and said that she had created a scene and we were going to step into the funeral home because I'd never really grieved, really.
Mm,
And
nice.
she said, there's a casket here, and I want you to walk up to the casket, your adult self, walk in with your 10-year-old self. And I pretty much collapsed, cried,
Mm-hmm.
and really, I think,
Sounds like you were ready for it.
yeah, that I was ready for it. And I'd not thought of this before, but it was the incomplete response, the work of Peter
Yeah.
Levine and somatic
Right.
work, because it had
Yeah.
been stored in my body since I was 10,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in my 40s when this happened.
Right.
So,
Right. That makes sense. A lot of sense. And I mean, so that has to influence how you work with your clients now when you're a therapist and some of our teaching too.
mm, it does. And I think that was one of the things that all counseling is grief work.
Hmm.
Is
All counseling? No,
all,
say more about that. It's very
well, because
amazing.
people are coming in with whatever their presenting problem
Mm.
is, but it is about uh,
Loss, some
loss.
sort of loss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Letting go,
Um,
loss. Yeah.
yeah. And so, whatever it is, does that make sense as I say
Yes,
that
because
to both of
everything
you?
changes
Yeah.
and ends, right?
Yes. Funny you would say that is that one of the things that I was going to mention in resources was the work of David Rico and the five givens, and everything changes and ends, and things don't go according to plans. I would not have planned, would have scripted out the story that's unfolded in my life, and that when I think about it, is life is not always fair. That's not fair.
And pain is a part of life.
Yeah.
And pain is a part of life, and it is out of our pain, if we so choose, that we can then create meaning, which is the acceptance from
Hmm.
Ross, and I really emphasize the meaning of that because we know that this is a life cycle that we all experience. So I always think as I work with people that we're talking about whatever the loss is, and then the hope, because hope is really important in grief work, is that you're not being cavalier, but that you're offering hope. And that's why it's important as people grieve their losses, whatever they are, as you all have talked about in your previous, what I've shared today is, and I do mean this, is because I've chosen is to make meaning out of all these things that I've shared with you all. It's not always easy, and I would prefer not to because, if I could have just stayed in that denial. But
Don't we all wish we could do that?
Yeah.
yeah,
What's really interesting, hearing you talk about grief and hearing you talk about grief in this timeline of your life, essentially. I've not thought of grief in that way before. So this has been really interesting to listen to you talk about it in that frame,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where it's and what really stuck out is when you talked about your mother dying, which I would argue 35 is young, um, for you to be going through that. But that you sort of talked about like your mother dying moved you into the next stage of grief as well as with your father, and so that in this way, what I was hearing from what you were sharing was that your life has been a complete timeline of grief, and that like when we talk about grief, at least from my perspective, is you think I've tended to think of like individual incidents of like you lose this person or this thing or whatever, and there's a grief bubble, let's call it, for lack of a better term, for that, and then there's something else that happens and there's a grief for that and there's a grief for that. But what you're talking about, it's almost like this continuation of grief, and as loss happens throughout your life, it
mhm,
sort of joins. And while you have grief in different ways for each event, but it sort of joins the bigger sort of momentum of grief as it moves through your life or doesn't move through your life, depending on what work you are or are not doing. And I think that that's really fascinating. And when I sat back and listened to it from that perspective, I was able to sort of see that in myself of like seeing that timeline from a larger scale and where I might be in my overarching timeline of grief as a human of loss and learning and progressing.
Mm,
You know what else I was thinking, Patty, along those lines is that if you do some work on yourself or go to therapy
Yeah.
mm,
and you work with your loss, your ability to move through it, like the stages of it.
Yeah.
mm,
And when we're listening to Rick, and he's talking about when as he got to be 35 and on, he started learning in his older age how to grieve more completely, fully.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure if I should say that, but
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
but it is because many people get arrested at one of the stages. I've just never thought of this either. And really part of grieving is being able to move through them and complete, you said the response, it's like a threat response, a loss, is a, and you can't get away from it and you can't decide to fight it. Some people do fight it. Some people try to get away from it. But ultimately, to complete it, it has to do with something, like you said, Rick, is being able to fully um, embody it,
Yeah.
fully, and it makes a difference in your life.
mhm. And that as we're talking about it, I'm actually going through some grief right now that's different. And the reason why I'm going to share this is that I actually feel like I'm embodying it this time. So again, from my 8-year-old self to obviously my 10 is dramatic to my 14-year-old to my 35-year-old to this 40-year-old who really began to heal some of this work. And but is that my wife and I are selling our house
Mm.
that we have lived in for 27 years,
Oof.
and it has been, and thinking about, the loss of this, my children grew up in this home, the significance of this home, and that as we're packing and doing things that I really, Jan, am embodying it. Like I'm pausing, I'm taking everything in, I'm feeling the loss of this home, these
Yes. Yeah.
memories.
It's like a little
But
bit of shock though. You just,
Mhm, mhm,
that's hard. Again, it's like everything changes and ends and you're like, yeah.
mhm. And that is my tagline is everything changes and ends.
Yeah.
And just breathing into that, which is very
Hmm.
much a Buddhist principle, the impermanence of life, which
Yeah.
is what we're talking about
Which
is,
is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Rick, I'm really curious. Thank you for all those your stories and
Yeah.
talking, being vulnerable. I'm wondering about how you work with your clients then, because I mean, even some of this is appropriate for the work you did where that therapist brought you into the funeral and you got to, it was
Mhm.
more of a gestalt kind of thing. It was a reenactment, or it could be a psychodrama. But
All of
so
those.
how do you work with your clients on this?
Mhm.
I mean,
Well,
I kind of know, but I'm asking you.
mhm.
Well, I don't know, so I
Oh,
want to know.
So Patty, this is for you.
okay. The first thing I'll say is that I think mindfulness practice, I think letting people, teaching people to be present in the moment. You know what I was saying about my house. I mean, I really am trying to be mindful, feel the feelings, not be in denial. So feel the sadness, feel the loss, reflect, and all that. So teaching people just how to be present in the moment. And then as we understand their storyline, and particularly, I said all counseling is grief. This is a quote from Pia Melody that I think is a really great one. She says, really, therapy is facing reality, which is what I think I do with people to the best of my ability, is help people to face their reality, to grieve. This is actually her term, is to grieve, and then to move forward. And so that as I help people sit in their suffering, um,
Mhm.
is that in whatever that might be, whatever type of loss, And then in the work that I do with people is that I try to help them get their story straight, which is to understand this. There are multiple ways you can do that. But in this story timeline, if we're talking about what we've talked about today, and then the opportunity to step into these scenes and help people to grieve that which they need to grieve. And so, depending on their story, it can be something from their developmental timeline, like myself, or it can be their adult self, a divorce, huge area of loss, giving up the dream, um, of being happily married, uh, from the vow to the day they die.
Mm.
And we know that 50% of folks that does not happen. The
Mhm.
loss of a child, that would be the most difficult. I would just acknowledge that for anybody that would, again, be listening to this. That is the most profound. And that's a whole talk in itself, is the loss of children, the loss of a job. Jan talking about aging,
Retiring. Retiring is
retiring.
grieving and loss.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from loss, that's a whole category. Retirement, which is another thing that I love my job. And right now I don't plan to retire, but am moving toward that. And that's a whole story in itself as well. And Jan, I don't know if you've talked about that idea of, retirement, but that's huge. Patty, you're in the height of your career and in it. So
It's like, whoa, I don't know about
I'd like to be farther ahead if I'm in the height of my career.
I would, at least that's what I would make up. You own your own business. You're
Yeah,
the famous
fair.
Patty from Biz Magic. So anyway,
Yeah.
so but in any of those, it's the ability to move through it. That's the key is
Yes,
in whatever way, is that
moving
you
through it.
let that come up, you sit with it, if it's through tears, or again, it could be anger, which would be very appropriate. So in the body and in the words and all that, but you move that through
Mhm.
you to come then to the other side,
Mhm.
and depending on what the situation is. And so again, I could talk more about that, but I won't. But I think it's just that mindful. This sounds easy, but it's not.
Oh no. Well, now I answered my own question. For kids, they have no direction in where they're going with it. They're going to drop into depression, sadness, or they're going to drop into anger, or they're going
Mhm,
to just be busy and pretend it's denial. I mean, just think of all that, because there's no kind of roadmap for them
mm-mm,
unless a parent or a mother helps, and it could be a parent.
mhm,
And so when we get older, I mean, that's what I think some therapeutic realms of
mm,
helping people doing pieces of work is really important to help us move through it, is like what you said,
mhm,
Yeah.
is important. Or you know what I think is that sometimes what'll happen is people will get sick if they have a lot of
Yeah,
losses, and they really, I think it manifests physically in their body.
I agree
mhm,
with that. Yeah.
mhm. Oh, yes.
I really love this idea. You really have my brain spinning here in like a really positive way of looking at like all counseling as grief and looking at, I mean, if we really look at it, we really stop and talk about it, the idea of like even somebody who's struggling with something, I mean, in some way it's the grief of a loss of an expectation that you've
Mhm,
created. And like while you were talking, I was like, some things I'm working on with my therapist, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to grieve XYZ. And that's what that is. And I was like taking notes as you were writing for my next therapy session.
That's great.
But I mean, I think that it's a when you it gives you a new perspective in which to look at the way that you are processing things in your life and to look at things. I feel like we have compassion for grief, right?
mhm,
And sometimes people struggle with having compassion for other things that they might deal with in their own mental health. But if you really look at everything as a form of grief in one way or another, that sure elicits a lot more compassion for everything that you're struggling with. And I think there's some power in that.
Mhm.
And for those who struggle with finding support is if you can find that compassion, you look at it like, well, what if it all is some form of grief in one way or another? man, that makes you want to really hold yourself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why what you were just saying, this Buddhist principle in some ways from John, is it David Rico, his writings.
Yeah.
I found that book and it changed my life. And it is just kind of letting go, is that everything changes and ends in life, and pain is a part of life rather than fighting it all. And I think that's what people do, is they get stuck somewhere where they're fighting it.
Yeah.
And it's so necessary to get through it. So I don't
Yeah.
know, I guess we're saying everybody needs to go to therapy.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the end all be all with all of our things, is you could use a little support. Maybe
Right.
check it out, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Or even
and
group work.
or even group work.
Yeah.
And I think even stop and think about if your life, if grief is a timeline in your life, where are you at in your grief
I
timeline?
like that.
And
That's
what
right.
can you do to
Mm-hmm.
recognize where you might be at and take steps to move to whatever. And though, right, we know that the stages aren't linear and all of that,
Yes.
but if we look at it in a linear way through your life of like, okay, I see that I'm in anger. Now how can I move into the next space? How can I get myself to acceptance in a compassionate, in a loving way that's not badgering myself for spending 30 years in denial or anger, but how
Mm-hmm.
can I take myself to the next place? And I think even that, in that mindfulness space, is a really great place to start. If you don't want to do therapy or can't afford therapy, because being able to afford a therapy is a privilege, and that's
Yes,
a
it is.
reality,
It
right?
is
And so we can
definitely.
say that, but not everybody is, it's not accessible to everybody. So what are ways that you can in yourself find compassion for yourself and where you're at and what you're going
Yep.
through, and take yourself through community, through connection, through your own mindfulness to the next stage in some way, through reading some of
Right.
these books that are great
Right.
resources.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of self-help books out
Yeah.
there, including mine.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so great, Rick. I mean, I thank you so much for sharing all of this and sharing so
Yes.
personally of it, and giving new ideas to grief and the way we're living, and that it's just something new to think about that I appreciate.
Yes. Thank you, partner. I really appreciate your view on it and bringing those insights in.
hmm Well, and that thank you both, because it got me thinking about like a couple of these things I had not linked together. And again, I want to encourage folks, because that's what this is about. We're talking about the unfolding of our life, and hearing both of you share things previously got me thinking about this, which was important for me, which again is hope. No matter where we're at, that we can move forward. And I always say this. I don't want to sound cavalier, because these things that a lot of folks are really individuals are dealing with are profound. But I know it's just important to be able to know that you can. That's what I really believe is no matter what it is, you can move through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been good to be with you both.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you like what you've heard, please share it with friends, subscribe, and leave a review.
And remember, information shared on this podcast is not medical advice. If you have a concern about your physical or mental health, please seek support from a professional.
If you have a story you'd like to share about things your mother forgot to mention, you can apply to be a guest.
We'd also love to hear a quick 90-second thing you've learned in your life.
You can find links to both of those over at our website at
thingsmymotherforgottomention.com or in the show notes.
Thank you.